Cultural diffusion, part 2. So this will be the second part of this should be the second page. These notes should take up the second page. And before we get started, let's go to a quick recap or review. What exactly is a cultural hearth? So once again, cultural hearth, these are the early centers of civilizations whose ideals and practices spread throughout the surrounding areas, spread out throughout the world and surrounding areas. And the cultural hearths that we will focus on primarily are the Middle America cultural hearth, which is now in Central America, the North African, the Middle Eastern, the Indus River Valley, and the Asian cultural hearth in China. When we're examining the cultural hearths, one question I want you guys to consider is what geographic features do we know that they have in common? And when you think about that, you want to think about the things that we've just discussed in class, or even what I discussed in a previous video of where nomads settled. And bam, what we'll see is that all of the cultural hearths, they became farming settlements. They were, of course, people. They were nomads. They settled into places with very, very fertile land. And if you can take a look, and if you compare both maps, you'll see that the Mesoamerica here, this is if you compare the map of the cultural hearths with the map of the globe, with the areas of the world with naturally fertile soil. And what that means is that these are places on the earth where it's very easy to farm and to grow vegetables. And you do not have to engage in irrigation and all those things. It's very, very easy to sustain farm, to grow your own food there. So if you take a look at Mesoamerica, here and here, Southern America, South America, here, they match. We see West Africa and North Africa, the Middle East, Indus River Valley, and China. So they all fertile soils. The early cultural hearths were formed around places where it was very, very with fertile soils. Now, what is that? Why is that important? Well, it brings us to the agricultural revolution and the importance of the agricultural revolution. So the more food that was available during the agricultural revolution, because of the fact that every person was not needed to farm because of these people settled in fertile land. So you could have a small number of people farming that allowed other people to focus on other jobs. So to develop specialized labor, we start seeing the first forms of specialized labor being developed here. So it's more food available due to the agricultural revolution. There was less need for everyone to farm, so hence we're able to develop other forms of making a living, such as specialized in specifically skilled jobs. Now look, as a result of people no longer everyone farming and everyone having specialized and skills jobs, what that is, you started seeing the first blacksmiths, people who made things, the first blacksmiths, people who made pottery, people who made weapons, those things. You saw people who tailors, those things, different labor, different cooks, different ways of cooking developed. And so what we saw is that because we have specialized labor, it allowed for people to trade as well as to develop the different technologies that go with trade. How did specialized labor help to develop trade? Well, you think about this. People in one area, go back to using our Chinese example. The Chinese, because they no longer had to focus all of their efforts on farming to live, they were able to develop tea. People were able to focus on things like developing tea and gunpowder, which we also got from China. And through that, they were able to trade tea and gunpowder to Europeans for things that they needed. This is actually an example of some of the technology that was used, that was developed by the members of the cultural hearths. This boat, we start seeing the first methods of trade. You need to have boats in order to trade. So we start seeing the first shipbuilders, the first inventors, these things, early explorers, because everyone was not needed to farm and to provide the basic living. You start seeing people doing things like exploring and inventing tools that you needed to explore and trade. So the increased wealth that came from farming and trading and inventing creating new inventions, led the villages to grow from small villages to major cities. And as a result of seeing explosive growth in population and power, the rulers of these cities, they needed to develop a more sophisticated and organized government to do things like provide for the people's needs. So, like to build roads, to manage to defend to defend your nation against invaders, to harvest the crops, to plan for the harvesting of the crops, to make sure all your people are fed. Also, as a result of having expanding, enlarging empire within these cultural hearths, you had to develop a systems of writing started to develop in order for people to record information and transmit it from one end of the empire to the next. Also, as a result of these cultural hearths forming into these large civilizations, you start seeing the first people be moving within a civilization, because you go from small villages to humongous small villages that take up a small area, a small amount of land, to large civilizations that take up the parts of continents, the larger parts of continents or parts of continents. And because of that, you started seeing internal migration, the first internal migration within civilizations. So the same things that we develop, that we speak about why people migrate now, for push and pull factors such as the economy, better way of life, those things. And just to sum it up, early man were nomads. As a result of what occurred as far as the Earth's atmosphere changing or changing in our climate, we were able to become sedentary, which means that we're able to find the lands that we could farm and settle down in, and we no longer had to become hunter-gatherers. We became sedentary. As a result of this, being sedentary and developing the first earliest villages, we came up with the agricultural revolution occurred. And with the agricultural revolution, that was just an explosive growth in farming techniques. And so it did not take the entire village working together to find food. It just took a small number of people to grow enough food for the entire village. As a result of that, the other people who were not farmers, developed into becoming the first skilled artisans and other jobs, the first inventors, the first explorers, the first blacksmiths, the first seamstress, those things. And as a result of skilled jobs, people had things to trade, and they developed technology, and they were able to interact with other cultures. And we started seeing some of the first cultural diffusion, going back to the example of Marco Polo and trading with China and bringing tea back to Great Britain, and tea becoming the national drink of Great Britain. As a result of this cultural diffusion, cities, civilizations became very wealthy. They grew exponentially, and because of this explosive growth, the rulers had to develop more sophisticated governments, going from small villages that took up a small amount of area relatively, to large civilizations that took up parts of continents. So you had to develop a sophisticated government to protect your people and provide for the basic needs of the people. Also develop written language to communicate. We started first seeing, and as a result of this, you start seeing the first migration internally within these large civilizations that took up large areas. And as a result of people moving from one side of the civilization or one part of the civilization or to another, you started seeing more cultural diffusion. Cultural diffusion has increased even more rapidly over the past 250 years. So we've already discussed the agricultural revolution. We'll discuss other revolutions that help speed up cultural revolution. And the first one is the Industrial Revolution. And the Industrial Revolution occurred during the 1700s and 1800s. And what it was is when countries started using machinery. Machinery started replacing people to produce goods and services. And that talks about what is industrialization. And it's the using of power-driven machines and factories to mass produce goods. So before this time, if you want a belt, you went to a tailor. And a tailor would make one belt, or they'd make one suit for you. Or if you needed to purchase a horse and buggy, you went to a blacksmith, and they made that one horse and buggy, and one person made it, and it took a very long time. During the Industrial Revolution, people started using machinery to mass produce, or to produce things faster. than what they normally would. And we start seeing the first factories being built. We also see the first sewing machines. This occurred during the Industrial Revolution, and it allowed it allowed tailors to make clothes quickly, because before this time, everything was hand sewn. So you start seeing the first sewing machines. You start seeing the first locomotives, first steam powered engines, which also allowed the power factories and also to transport goods and services faster and over longer distances. Now, and just kind of recapping, the Industrial Revolution, what it allowed people to do was to produce goods quickly and cheaply. And so we started seeing, as a result of this, we started seeing a change of the economies in the industrializations. Exactly the same way that we started seeing a change in people or the economies in the early villages during the agricultural revolution, because you didn't need as many people to do as much work or do the same work. So people started doing other things. People found other jobs, started focusing their energies other places. So cultural and social changes. These began to occur as people moved. We talked about urbanization, as urbanization occurred. So you started seeing cultural and social changes as people started moving away from the farms and into the cities to work in the factories. So they started moving from the agricultural areas to the urban industrialized areas. And so we started seeing the cities growing larger and larger during this time, during the Industrial Revolution. Started seeing before this time, the majority of people lived in farms. But during the Industrial Revolution, people moved away from the farms, and you started seeing the majority of populations of countries being in the cities instead of in the farms. The next revolution that we'll discuss that greatly contributes to cultural diffusion is one that we're in the midst of right now, and this is the information revolution, and it's relatively new. It started around the end of the 1900s, so around the 80s, 1990s, with the advent of computers. And what computers made it do was what computers did is the personal computers made it possible to store large amounts of information. And then with the advent of the internet, you're able to send this information all over the world. So before this time, due to the personal computers, we're able to store large amounts of information and to communicate and send that information all over the world in the blink of an eye. The information revolution is all about the theme of geography that we discussed this movement. If you'll see, this picture represents how quickly ideals move. You just need a server, and you just need an internet connection and a computer, and not even a computer, internet connection and a phone, a smartphone, or a tablet, and you can send ideals all over the world, ideals and information all over the world instantly. So, in a quick recap, the agricultural revolution. It occurred. People stopped being nomads, and agriculture transformed human society from nomadic hunter-gatherers into farmers and house builders. During the Industrial Revolution, it brought people into the towns and cities, saw an explosion in consumer goods, first mass transportation, and the growth of the economy. And then we experienced the information revolution, which we are a part of now. And it just allows us to transfer information and communicate at the blink of an eye. The end. Make sure you highlight the answers to the questions in your notes guide, and I'll see you in class. Have a good evening.